here, social media editor, natural hair enthusiast, mixed girl, and now the host of Crowned, a series where we talk all about the history and significance of black hair. Today we're covering a hairstyle rooted in history and tradition, and one of the most iconic black hairstyles that is a piece of black culture, cornrows. The first thing to know about cornrows is that they were made specifically for curly, coily, and tight textured hair. What you might not realize is that curly, kinky, and coily hair is actually super delicate, so a braided style like cornrows helps protect them from moisture loss and breakage. All that to say though, at their core, cornrows are technology. They're a series of geometric patterns braided flat against your scalp. Plus, they're low maintenance, and they're actually the foundation of a lot of other hairstyles. They provide a scalp-like canvas for wig caps so that wigs can stay laid. Or they can just be styled by themselves in endless ways, or even with beads and string. So here's an example of one of my favorite hairstyles that my friend and celebrity stylist Nigella Miller did for me, where she started with cornrows and then added extensions to create this sick look. But braids are often appropriated by non-black people, which is just one example of how white supremacy devalues, erases, and exploits black aesthetics. Braids are often seen as a trend instead of a style that was created specifically for these textures. Even when it comes down to what they're called. Let's get this straight, there's no such thing as boxer braids. These are cornrows. So why do we care, and where did cornrows come from? While braids are found in various cultures, cornrows are an authentically African hairstyle designed for black hair textures. Cornrows were created and worn by various African societies, and they were part of tribal customs. In Africa, braids were a way to show people who you were. They signified your tribe, your marital status, your wealth, your religion, and more. And during enslavement, Europeans cut black people's hair as a way to dehumanize us and alienate us from our relatives. Let's talk about the Middle Passage. This was the harsh journey where Africans were taken from their homes and shipped to North America, and then were forced into enslavement. And then during enslavement, they were a practical way to wear our hair during long, labored hours. Now that we know the origin and how it was worn originally, let's fast forward to the Great Migration in 1920, when black people moved up north for better jobs. Even though black people were gaining economic power, they were also being pressured to conform to Eurocentric beauty standards. In order to mimic the majority, we tried all kinds of things to straighten our hair, but that's a whole other episode. Anyways, around the 1960s, braids finally regained popularity. This is also when we felt empowered to embrace our natural hair on the whole, and that's thanks partly to the Black Power and Black is Beautiful movements. And while these movements were taking place, they were seen as radical. So when the late Cicely Tyson wore cornrows for the first time on television in 1960, it was a historical moment in American television. For once, black hair wasn't about conforming. Mind you, this is a time when black people couldn't vote, work where they wanted, live where they wanted, be respected, or even live freely. It was huge to see our heritage on TV. Even today, black people are stifled from wearing styles created specifically for our textures. For example, Serena Williams and Allen Iverson have had to stand up for the ability to wear cornrows on the court. And anyone with natural hair knows that you worry about the comments you're gonna get when you go into the workplace with natural hair and how you might feel pressured to conform. When I started interviewing for jobs after college, I wanted to go natural so badly, but everyone in my life told me that I should keep my hair straight in order to secure a good job. They told me that straight hair would help me blend in. And unfortunately, they were right. But at that point, I didn't know anything other than conforming. It was so normalized for me. What I didn't realize is that so many black women before me had faced discrimination just for wearing cornrows to work. Like in 1980, when American Airlines demanded that Renee Rogers no longer wear cornrows to work. And in 1987, when Pamela Walker was fired for wearing cornrows to her job at the Chicago Regency Hyatt. And even in 2009, when a teacher cut a child's braids during class. That's why when we talk about and when we see cornrows today, it's so important to recognize that Black people are discriminated against and even face job loss for wearing cornrows, while non-Black people just don't. Braiding isn't just about hair. It goes back to societies all over Africa and has traveled with African people all over the world. Braiding is a symbol of perseverance and tradition, but most importantly, it reminds us that Black hair is Black history. Today we're covering the silk press, a Black hairstyle born out of survival. The first thing to know about the silk press is that it is a hair straightening technique that presses kinky, coily, and curly hair into sleek, straight strands. The second thing to know is that this hairstyle has been a trend for years, and there's a good reason why, but more on that later. This style is just as popular today as it was decades ago. For example, Tien Tamara Mowry wore a silk press during the later seasons of Sister Sister. Sleek and straight strands were Aaliyah's signature look, and Michelle Obama wore a silk press throughout her career as First Lady. And don't get it twisted, while celebrities have been wearing this style for years, it's also super accessible. I've even gotten a silk press earlier this year and one in 2019 at Spoken Wheel Salon in Soho by hairstylist and color specialist Alex Hires. When I want to switch up my hair for a couple of weeks, this is my go-to style. But what makes the silk press so important and where did it come from? First, let's get into the history. Black people have been straightening hair with hot tools since the early 1900s due to discrimination. Historically, straightening our hair has been an act of survival. When Black folks moved up north during the Great Migration, they faced new challenges, even after enslavement. After enslavement was abolished, newly freed Black Americans were virtually unprotected by the government. This led to widespread violence by terrorist groups and the oppressive Jim Crow laws that kept Black folks from enjoying their full rights as citizens, especially when it came to employment. Finding jobs and creating a life meant altering our hair texture in order to fit into the European beauty standards of the time. Unlike cornrows or bantu knots, hair straightening was born out of the need to survive in a racist society. And while straightening our hair is a popular style, it's important to note that exposing delicate, afro-textured hair to high heat with hot tools or chemicals can be extremely damaging. And by the way, the silk press was not the first hair straightening technique created for curly, kinky, and coily textures. There were a few other styles that walked so that the silk press could run. One of the earliest examples was called pullers. This straightening process involved two round balls mounted on a handle, which when pulled through the hair, loosened kinks and coils. Then during the mid-1900s, cold soap waves were a popular way to achieve pronounced parts and sleek looks. This look was mostly worn by men, and it could be achieved by using a hairbrush or a comb, large amounts of hair grease, water, running it through the hair, and then using a do-rag to preserve it overnight. Then in the 1920s, the hot comb was popularized by Madam C.J. Walker. And contrary to popular belief, Madam C.J. Walker actually didn't invent the hot comb, but it was a central part of her business, which is why she's often credited with the invention. The hot comb was part of Madam C.J. Walker's shampoo press and curl technique, which was a hair straightening method that was to become the foundation of the Black beautician industry. And it's pretty reminiscent of how hair is pressed out even today. The hot comb is an iron and comb combination that, when heated up, straightens and detangles curly, kinky, and coily textures. When I've had my hair pressed in the last couple of years, hairstylists have used a hot comb to slick back the hair just before my edges to make it as straight as possible. So the tool is still pretty relevant today. But as technology advanced, a new hair straightening technique came into popularity. Enter lye relaxers. To straighten hair, lye, which is a metal hydroxide, was mixed with potatoes in order to make the formula less caustic. This creamy concoction was applied to hair, and the result was straightened curls, kinks, and coils. Unfortunately, the lye was extremely toxic and could actually eat the skin right off of someone's head. But let's get back to the silk press. After the most recent natural hair movement took off in 2009, some Black people wanted the option to wear their hair straight, temporarily. Voila, the silk press. You get the same look as a relaxer, but none of the chemicals. Personally, I wish I had known about this style back when I was getting relaxers, because it's a lot safer and less damaging than using chemicals. But let's get down to how you go from curly, kinky, and coily hair to sleek, straight strands. One of the major steps to achieve a silk press is to use a heat protectant to minimize the inevitable heat damage on afro-textured hair. Although it's important, traditionally, afro-textured hair has been excluded from studies that test the effectiveness of heat protectants. But we'll get into hair textures in another episode. Back to the silk press. The style starts on twice shampooed hair that is then deep conditioned for 30 minutes in order to stave off breakage and tangling. After that, hair is rinsed with cool water in order to close the cuticles. Then hair is blown out and finally straightened into small sections for that extra silky finish. The style lasts around 2 to 3 weeks, depending on your hair routine. And by wrapping your hair at night in a silk scarf, your style is protected from breakage and remains silky day to day. And while this style is beautiful and trendy, it's important to note that hair straightening is a tool of adaptation for Black people in a racist society. And let's be honest, only in the last few years where we've reached a new chapter in the natural hair movement has it been accessible for afro-textured hair to be cared for in salons that cater to white people. Often, hair straightening was and is the only option when caring for Black hair. And in a society where European beauty is the standard, hair straightening was originally a trauma response to ongoing anti-Black violence. In contrast, a style like cornrows or bantu knots is rooted in pre-colonial cultural practices. So when Black people wear straight hair, it's a symbol of survival and of strength, and it's also a great way to mix up our look. Let's be honest, it's nearly impossible to have a conversation about natural hair without getting into natural hair type and texture. For example, you'll often hear questions like, what's your curl pattern? Do you have high porosity or low porosity hair? Are your curls more 3A or 4C? We often use the hair typing system to discuss commonalities, or to get product recommendations, or even just to better understand our own hair. Today, we're covering hair typing systems, which is the increasingly popular method of categorizing hair by existence, shape, density, porosity, fineness, and tightness of a curl. I know I first became acquainted with this concept when I was transitioning from relaxed to natural hair. At the time, I had no idea what my natural hair texture was like because I had been straightening my hair or getting relaxers for as long as I'd been taking care of it myself. And then later in my natural hair journey, I used the Andre Walker hair typing system, which we'll get into later. But this helped guide me towards products that were formulated with my curl pattern in mind. Even now, so many natural hair products are made with a hair typing system in mind. Not to mention, it's pretty much the basis of how we talk about natural hair ever since the resurgence of the most recent natural hair movement. But where did hair typing come from? And why is it such a major part of the natural hair conversation today? Hair typing has been around since the early 1900s. Hair typing in the 20th century was about racial categorization to support racist ideologies. One of the earliest examples of hair typing was invented in 1908 by Eugene Fischer, a German Nazi scientist who created a hair gauge in order to determine Nimbians' proximity to whiteness based on their hair texture. Then, in 1948, another informal hair typing system was the apartheid pencil test. It said that if an individual could hold a pencil in their hair when they shook their head, they could not be classified as white. So when we really look at it, the origins of the hair typing system were to compare and to contrast the amount of whiteness a Black person displayed. Despite the racist origins, the current hair typing system we use so widely exists for a different reason. The current hair typing system we use today, also known as the hair chart, all started in the 1990s on the Oprah Winfrey Show. Oprah's then and current hairstylist, Andre Walker, initially created this system to market his hair products. But eventually it was widely adopted, and it's still the same hair chart we use today. Initially, the Walker hair typing system divided hair into straight, wavy, curly, and coily. But over time, subtypes were added. And don't worry, we're gonna cover the whole system. But first, it's important to note that this hair typing system has been widely critiqued for favoring looser curls over kinkier and coilier textures. With that in mind, let's get into it. Buckle up. So the first thing to know is that the Andre Walker hair typing system categorizes hair with a series of letters and numbers, with 4C on the coiliest side to 1A on the straightest end. First, we have the 4 range, which describes the kinkiest and coiliest curls on the spectrum. 4A hair has a very defined coil with an O-shaped pattern. 4B hair is kinky coily with a less defined coil and a more Z-shaped curl. 4C is defined as kinky coily with a tight coil. It almost has no visible kink pattern unless seen from up close. The 3 range is where things get a little more curly. 3A describes hair with loose curls that are thick and full with a definite curl pattern. 3B is curly with tight curls and a medium amount of space between curls. 3C hair has corkscrew curls that are very tightly curled together. Then there's the 2 range. 2A hair has loose waves in an S pattern. 2B hair has defined waves that can be a little resistant to styling. It also has more of a defined S pattern. 2C has wider waves and is said to be resistant to styling. Then the 1 range describes the straightest hair on the spectrum. 1A is straight, fine, very soft, and tends to be hard to hold a curl, but it also is hard to damage. 1B hair is straight, has a medium texture, and tends to be more full. 1C is straight, has a coarse texture, and is hard to curl. And that's the end of the chart. Hair types help to predict and describe how different chemicals and processes might interact with hair. This system also helps us set expectations surrounding hair health, but it's important not to conflate hair type with hair health. According to the founder of Spoken Wheel Salon, John Raymond, the way that we understand hair health is by 3 things: elasticity, porosity, and plasticity. The less porous the hair, the more healthy. So think about a sponge that has all these holes. It's not very strong. The less porous, the stronger the hair is. Plasticity is the ability for hair to retain its shape. For example, when 4C or 4B hair is compromised by heat damage, it won't immediately revert back to itself. Elasticity is hair's ability to revert back to its natural shape after it's been pulled on when wet or dry. We know if hair is healthy based on those 3 things. I know it's a lot, but honestly, this hair typing system isn't in-depth enough. Only typing hair by shape in our current system leaves out texture. And although hair typing is widely used and accepted as the way to talk about natural hair, it has also been critiqued for favoring textures like 3A and 3C over 4A and 4C, which is also known as texturism. There also tends to be more information about 2B to 3C hair rather than 4A to 4C. Even the way we speak about different hair textures is inherently based on the idea that Afro-textured hair is lesser. Texturism is still extremely prevalent today and was famously displayed when child celebrity Blue Ivy was bullied by adult celebrities for having kinky hair. On the converse, child celebrity Northwest was praised for her looser curl texture and was considered a natural hair icon. It's also a sad example about how some mixed kids are fetishized for having looser hair textures. Let's get into the facts. Texturism is the discrimination of kinky Afro-textured hair in favor of those with smoother and looser textures. But let's get back to the hair typing system. While it can be helpful and a great jumping off point to understand your hair type and texture, it's also important to realize that categorizing hair types, especially Afro-textured hair in the 4 range, can be extremely restrictive and limiting. All types and textures deserve praise and acknowledgement, but it was only very recently that black hair has been embraced the same way that straight hair always was. But let's not forget, in many spaces, we still aren't able to wear our natural hair textures the way that looser hair types on the spectrum are. But that's a whole other episode. Despite the institutional disregard for black hair, embracing our natural hair is something we should all be able to do. But it isn't so easy for everyone. But everyone, especially the black people in our society, should be afforded the information to do so.